registrations that were taking place were done by paper. I'm sure a lot of you were there before your class installations at your agencies, so you're probably pretty familiar with what that environment was like pre-class. One interesting or unique aspect of our agency was that we were extremely decentralized. You heard earlier that we have 40 community centers. We also have 2 regional sports facilities, 3 regional parks, senior centers, art centers, all sorts of places that all offer camps, upwards of 70 facilities. And each of them was very much running it kind of like in their own silo and doing their own thing. So to help set the stage and rewind this back to 2002, we've got some friendly reminders. Any Harry Potter fans? Harry Potter #2 had just come out, so we had just started learning about the Harry Potter world. And Alicia Keys had just won a Grammy for Best Song for Falling, beating out Drops of Jupiter, if you're a fan. Alright, so this is quite a long time ago. And while we were kind of in the Stone Ages, or paper age, if you want to call them that, there were some benefits that we saw to this registration method. So what used to happen on day camp registration day, which we set in February, was that parents would circle that date on their calendar, and what you would have to do is go to a center and stand in line at that center, make your way to the front of the line, register for your camps, and then you move right over to the right, and you fill out your day camp forms, and then you move right over and make your payment, and then you were good to go. You were all signed up for camps, you had all your forms turned in, you didn't have to do anything until June came and you dropped your kid off with us. And that's how it worked back when we did paper registration. Of course, there were some drawbacks too. It took a long, long, long time. And at a place like Sports and Learning Complex, you can ask LaJuan what registration days were like before class at the Sports and Learning Complex with literally hundreds, almost thousands of kids, each doing their own registrations on paper, possibly for multiple camps, plus the extended cares. And if you wanted to take, we offer our camps in 2-week sessions, so if you wanted to take one camp at the Sports and Learning Complex and one camp here at Tech Rec, you had to pick one, wait in line in the morning, register, and then drive down here and hope to still have a spot ready for you when you came down here into this camp. So there were definitely some problems. As an agency, we made the jump to class at the end of 2002, and you make, I will try my hardest to refer to it as class in every instance, but if I say SmartLink, that's what we call our implementation of class. We call it SmartLink, and just like in your agencies, I'm sure, the introduction to class overturned almost all of our established business practices. We were all kind of jumping over that digital divide that we talked about a little bit yesterday. But some things were left in the past. And one of the things that did not make the digital jump with us was the day camp forms process. So what we did, unintentionally, was now sever the link that we had between the registration process and turning in the forms. Right? In the paper days, you did it all under one roof, on your one visit there. You walked in the doors, you registered, you paid, you filled out your form, you walked out the door. So we made sure that for everybody that came in that door, we sat them down, filled out their forms, answered their questions, made sure we had everything locked away. With the advent of class, that decentralized model broke, and we're now working on a very centralized model, especially for registration. So now, you can just come here to Tech Rec and register for all your camps around the county, or you don't even have to come in. With eConnect, you can do everything from your home, register for all your camps, get everything done and out of the way, and you don't ever have to set foot in the center. But the problem is, you don't hear anything about forms, you don't hear anything from our staff unless we're proactive, and then inevitably it comes to be June 6th, June 7th, they notice they're out of school, and all of a sudden everybody's scrambling to try to get these forms collected in time so that we have the emergency information for the kids we're going to offer camps for. So the crux of the problem was that we broke that link. We now have registrations occurring all over the place, and it seems like we're always behind the 8 ball trying to catch back up. And in particular with day camp registrations, one thing that's unique about day camp registrations is that you register in February for a program that's not until June. So it's not like a trip coordinator where they're starting to get ready for their trip right after people register and can start being proactive, right? We have our registration in February, and then if you're not thinking about it, if that facility director is not on their game and they snooze it until June, they're in a lot of trouble trying to get those forms. So, if you guys are, or your agency was in close to the same position as ours a couple of years ago, some of these questions might seem familiar to you. You might have parents calling you asking where they need to turn in their forms, what forms they need to turn in. Do I need a health form if I'm sending an EpiPen? Does it need a doctor's signature? Do I need the medication form too, or just a health form? All of these questions would come in every year, February to June, to our help desk. And like I said, we were running a mile a minute trying to keep up with those questions. Add on top of that all the questions that we would field, or that we would get from our field. So they would call us and say, what forms does this person need? Do I need an immunization certificate for everybody in my camp or just for certain kids?
Yeah, so I was going to say, even and the most polite parents in our group would do nothing. Once they got the registration for the camp they wanted, guess when the first time we saw them? 10 minutes after camp started, they'd push the kid out of the car, we wouldn't see him, we'd hear a tire squealing. So, and we have no information on this kid, no exact contact. We don't know where they're, what they're allergic to or anything.
And so, to help with the eConnect registration, the help desk took on a process where we let customers fill in almost a digital form that would just shoot off an email to us, and then we took care of the routing for those digital forms behind the scenes. And so staff would call us saying, hey, I missed an email. Hey, can you resend all my 80 kids' forms to me? I deleted that email. I thought I printed it out, but I sent it over here. I emailed it to you. So we got all of those problems coming from the staff as well. And so you put all of this into kind of like a pressure cooker and let it run for 6 or 7 years. And we were all just kind of limping through this day camp season, making do the best we could, because it seemed like we'd take a deep breath at the end of August, and then before you knew it, it was February again. We got to do this whole thing all over again. So we were having a lot of trouble trying to keep up with all of these problems, both from customers and from the field. But it took a catalyst for us to actually get moving, and that was we got a new deputy director, and our deputy director had children that he would like to send to summer camp. And when he went through the experience of trying to find the correct forms and register and turn them into the right places, he was lost. And if our deputy director, who's supposed to be extremely familiar with our parks and recreation operations, cannot make it through that, how are we expecting a typical parent to make it through that same process? And so our deputy director, Brad, left and said, listen, we got to make this better. This just isn't working. We have to make this better for our staff and for the parents that are trying to register. So before we get to the ideas we had for our solution, I just want to kind of laundry list some of the problems we were seeing to help define them a little bit better. So we talked about how the crux of the problem was that we were severing that link between registration and form collection. So now, like I said, we were playing a constant game of catch up to try to make sure we had everything before the start of camp. And that wasted a lot of time, okay? A lot of our staff's time calling parents, trying to get forms, checking the forms, making sure they formatted their dates right for the tetanus shots, all of that wasted effort, not to mention the wasted effort on the time of the parents filling out 3 or 4 or 5 sets of forms, photocopying them, sending them to the facility, so everybody in this process was wasting a bunch of time. They had to fill out the same information over and over and over again. So we require 1 set of forms sent to each of our program facilities, which meant that if you were taking 4 camps at 4 different centers, you would fill out the same form 4 different times. If you had 3 forms, you were filling out those same 3 forms 4 different times. And you had to put your kid's name and birth date and address and all of that information we have already in our SmartNet account, but you had to fill it out 12 times over the course of the summer. And in the meantime, we weren't sharing any of it. So we said you could turn your forms in at one center and then we'll take care of spreading it around to the other ones that you're attending. But truthfully, we did a pretty poor job at that. And this is where you start to hear things like, I in our office at like a week ago, it must be in the courier somewhere. And the other camp director is going, well, I'm going on a field trip and I don't know his emergency contact. The info wasn't saved. So even if you happen to make it through this arduous process for one of our summers, like I said, that parent circled February 26th on their calendar every year and marked it with a big red circle and said, crap, this is when I got to go do all this stuff again for the next year. And there was no customer education. At no point in the registration process did we tell customers what forms we were expecting from them, where to turn them in, how they would be collected, how we would be contacting them. There was very little in the way of customer education. Because of the massive amount of forms and work along with it, we also found we had nurses audits that would go check to make sure people had the proper emergency contact. And we found that a lot of our forms were incomplete. You would have a health form that just said allergies. You didn't know whether it was a food allergy or environmental or anything like that. And our staff, and in their defense, they had a lot of stuff to do to get ready for these camps, where our staff were not in the habit of vetting these forms completely to make sure we had accurate information. Kind of along those same lines, the staff had no idea which forms was required. So if I had a homeschooler who was immunized, do I need to turn in an immunization certificate? What if I had a public schooler who was religiously exempt? Do they need an immunization certificate? The front desk staff at the community centers are where these registrations are taking place, just like the front desk right out here. But that staff member is unequipped to answer a lot of those more difficult questions related to these forms. I already mentioned how we had wasted staff effort trying to chase down these forms, maybe for a kid that meant to withdraw completely. They're not even coming to camp this year, but instead we made 6 phone calls and sent 2 letters to try to get them to turn in their forms. I'm sure it's obvious by now that there was no automation throughout any of this process. We were all relying on phone calls and emails and inter-office mail to try to get us through this process and kind of crossing our fingers that we would end up in a good spot by June. Perhaps the most important part is that we didn't have any leverage with these customers. They registered and they paid back in February, and as far as they were concerned, they're good to go. They got their summer planned. And it didn't matter how many times we called them to say, hey, could you make an extra 15-minute trip here to the center? They said, listen, you got my money, I'm registered, I'm coming to that camp. And we didn't really have any leverage to say, no, we have to have these forms, make sure you turn these in. We couldn't really turn them away because they had already paid, and we're not just going to turn a 12-year-old back out or something like that. So we had no leverage with the customer to try to get the information that we needed. So a laundry list of problems that we're going to revisit after we talk about our solution. But like I said, our mandate came down from the deputy director to Len. Len grabbed myself and a couple people that were really familiar with the day camp process each and every year, some of our veterans in the commission here. And we sat down and started developing a solution. And the first thing we did to develop that solution was to pare down the amount of info that we were collecting from these customers. So I'm going to run really quickly through the forms that you may have been required to turn in prior to 2012. So first up was the participant profile form. This is just your basic emergency contact form. You have to fill out at the top where it says your name, your barcode, address information, emergency contact information, what camps you're going to, and then the bottom part is just a liability waiver saying you're not going to sue if you get hurt or anything like that. So every summer program customer had to fill this out. We had to have this for every single one of our summer program attendants. The day camp authorization form. So we have 2 flavors of summer programs. We have our day camps, which you guys can think of as day camps, and then playgrounds, which is a drop-in program that kind of runs from 9 to 3. It's like a real stripped down day camp. And so each of those offerings kind of had different policies associated with it. So our day camps, our actual day camps, required parents to sign them in and sign them out. So this day camp authorization form said who was allowed to pick up your kid and drop your kid off at our camps. And that was required for every day camp participant. The day camp medication form, pretty self-explanatory. If you had to take any medication while you were on site, including EpiPens, asthma inhalers, anything like that, is part of this day camp medication form. We had a separate form that was the health form that was supposed to be for anything like detail about those allergies. So if you marked allergy, it would ask you, is it environmental, food allergy, a medicine allergy, that kind of thing. Next up is this fun-looking one right here, which is the Maryland State Immunization Certificate. If you were not immunized, according to the codes of the state of Maryland, you had to fill this out saying how you were immunized. So this is for homeschoolers, for kids that were religiously exempt. And then, last but not least, is the letter to our parents for that playground program, explaining the policies of the program, that it only runs from 9 to 3, there's no extended care, that kind of stuff. So a customer may have needed any or all of these 7 forms, and we kind of expected customers to feel their own way through this. We put these forms up on the web as PDFs, we put them in the day camp brochure, but we didn't tell parents which ones to fill out, how to fill them out, where to send them, or anything like that. And you can see that it is a boatload of information. So our team sat down and we first said, okay, what information is required? What do we have to know for each and every kid that attends our summer programs? And it turns out, it's really not that much.
Right.
A lot of the information that you fill out on these forms is duplicate information. It's things like name and address and parents and phone numbers and that kind of stuff, which we all have in the SmartLink system. So we took that required info and we narrowed it down into essentially 8 pieces of information that we needed to get from each one of our customers. And we called those the Great 8 prompts in our agency. When I did this presentation for our field, we dubbed them the Great 8 prompts to try to give them a moniker that they could remember. But there are 8 pieces of information that we collect at the time of registration for each one of our summer program registrants. So this should look familiar to everybody in this room. This is program registration from class. And I have up here an example of somebody registering for one of our summer camps, and the register button is nice and highlighted, like as if you're talking to your staff in the field, ready to click the register button. Okay? However, when you click this register button, what do you usually see afterwards?
Register successful.
Registration successful. Would you like to enter payment now? Okay? When you click register on one of our summer playgrounds or summer day camps, you get interrupted in that registration process with those Great 8 questions. Okay? And what we did to do this are called registration activated custom client prompts. So this is the part of the presentation where we're going to get into a little bit of detail with class and report printing, particularly, and crystal reports. So if you have any questions about the technical aspects, or if I go too fast, stop me. And if it really gets in depth, come find me after, and I'll be happy to talk to you about this. But we use registration activated custom client prompts to collect this information. So there's 2 parts to that name. First is custom client prompts. Okay, these are those prompts that you see on a customer account when you go to other info, right? And you've got any of the custom prompts listed there. So we use them for things like an ADA accommodation or a driver's license validation or something like that. So this information is stored on the customer, but the first part of that name is registration activated, which means you can put these prompts appear when you click that register button for certain activities, whatever activities you put these on. So I'm going to run through these real quickly because they'll be important later when we go through our examples. But the first 2 questions are emergency contact name and phone number. The next 2 questions are primary care provider name and phone number. In that case, we're looking for their physician, their child's primary physician. Has the participant been immunized, which we'll come back to a little bit later. Please indicate the participant's swimming ability, whether they're a swimmer or non-swimmer, so we know whether to test them or not. Are there any health issues staff should be aware of? And that's just a yes or no question at this point. We just ask them, is there any health issue related to your child that we need to know about? And they just answer yes or no at this point. And then finally, the date of the last tetanus shot, which is a requirement from the state of Maryland for us. We have to know when they were last tetanus boosted. So those 8 pieces of information are all that was required for each and every one of our summer program participants. Now, if you remember back to those forms a second ago, we have some additional forms that might be required. If you have an allergy, you need a health form. If it's a playground, we need that deputy director. If it's a day camp, we need that authorization form. Okay, so we're going to get to the other forms and how they factor in just a second. For now, though, remember that we need just these 8 pieces of information for every single one of our summer program participants. And by using the registration activated custom client prompts, we guarantee that we get this information, or that at least that these questions are answered. Right? They can just put dot through there or something like that. But we guarantee that these questions are answered in order to register for the program.
So you
So
allow online registration.
we do, and these prompts show up for eConnect registration.
we
as well.
don't.
We'll talk about. There's a slight complication with eConnect, but I'll talk about that in a little bit. But if they can't answer these questions, if the parent is unequipped to answer these questions, you can see the only option available is cancel. So you can't. The system will not let you continue with registration until you have answers for this. And so that's how we were guaranteed to have this information for every one of our participants. So I mentioned that it was registration activated, custom client prompts. So this is the registration activated part. This is our Art Camp Art Explorers activity. And if you go to the prompts tab, this is where you list all those different prompts. So we have, are there any health issues that I should be aware of? Date of the last tetanus shot, emergency contact. So on the activity itself, there's a separate maintain prompts window where you actually make the prompts themselves. But then you go in here, and there's a drop-down list, and you add those prompts onto whatever activities you want. So in our case, we added them to our day camps and to our summer playgrounds. Over there on the right is the custom client part. So this is an example of the client that we registered earlier. And if you go to the custom prompts tab, you'll see the answers to all those questions. Emergency contact name, phone number, primary care physician name, phone number, so on and so forth. So the information, for those of you who are familiar with the class database, okay, they're stored in association with the client ID. Okay? They're not stored at all on the activity or on the course or anything like that. They're stored and they follow the client around, so whatever the client registers. One interesting note about these registration activated prompts too, when you first launch it, let's say you have somebody who attended Art Camp last year when we were not doing this form process, and they're not coming to camp this year. When you turn on these prompts for Art Camp, these are going to appear on the customer because they have that registration in their history. Okay, so when you put these on an activity, it will, for anybody who is registered for that activity, past or present, add these on, but it won't fill them in automatically. Does that make sense? So they appear, but it won't fill them in automatically. So you may get calls every once in a while saying, "Hey, I don't know why this kid's not registered for camp at all, but these are showing up," and it's because they were registered for that same camp last year. So after we collect all that information and store it on the client's account, we are able to generate out of class that same exact participant profile form that we saw earlier with some marked improvements. Number one, you can see that all this information at the top is pre-populated by class. So it grabs their address, their phone number, their emergency contact, which we associate as main contact, at least with their primary emergency contact. We give them the space to list an alternate emergency contact if they want to write another one in. And it starts grabbing those answers to the questions. So primary care provider in this case is Dr. Gatsby. Okay? The participant is a swimmer. Has the participant been immunized? In this case, yes, and they attended a Maryland public school. What is the date of the last tetanus shot? And are there any health issues staff should be aware of? This client answered no. Okay? So all of that information that we needed on our previous participant profile form is on it. However, the customer doesn't have to fill it out every time. It's already filled out. Whenever you need these, you just go into the report printing, fire off participant profile, and you've got it ready for the parent to sign right there. Okay? So let's talk about those other forms a little bit. The participant profile itself and the rest of the forms are stored on the registration confirmation. Okay? So if you're familiar with Crystal, you go in and you customize the registration confirmation. What we did is add a bunch of footers to that. And each of those footers represents those different forms. Okay? So the first footer that you see is the participant profile form with that waiver down there at the bottom. The next footer is the health and medication form. The next one would be the playground letter, and so on and so forth. And what we did was suppress those different sections based on what you registered for. So if you registered for a playground, you don't need a day camp authorization form. So we put in a suppression logic that if they registered for a playground, don't print out day camp authorization. The flip side of that is if they registered for a day camp, don't print out that deputy director's playground letter. Okay? If they answered no to the question, are there any health issues staff should be aware of, then they don't need to fill out that additional medication form. That's all just wasted effort at that point. They just told us that there's nothing we need to be aware of. Okay? So if they answer no, it doesn't print out a medication form. But if they answer yes, then that section of the report will print out right behind the registration confirmation. So, I kind of mentioned it in there, but there were a couple questions in those grade 8 that are what we call trigger questions. The first one is that health question I just mentioned, right? So if they answer yes, then the health form prints out. If they answer no, then the health form does not print out. Same thing with the Maryland immunization certificate, okay? If they answer yes, that they attended a Maryland public or private school, then they do not get that immunization certificate. We have a relationship with the public school system, and because of that, we have access to their records should we need it. However, if they attended an out-of-state school, or were homeschooled, or they were not immunized for whatever reason, a religious or a medical exemption, then we do need them to fill out that immunization form. And so if they answer one of these second two options here, then it prints out that immunization certificate indicating that they need to fill it out. And here is a look actually at our suppression logic. So if answer number 12, which in this case is the answer to the health and medication form, if they answer no, then you suppress this health and medication form, and because we know the customer doesn't need it. So let's go back and take a look at that laundry list of problems and see what we accomplished by recombining the registration process with the day camp forms collection. Because remember, now when a customer comes in, they register, those 8 grade prompts pop up, they answer those questions and complete the registration, and right behind the registration confirmation comes out all the forms that they need. Okay? The participant profile if they, for everybody, the day camp authorization if they need it, the playground letter if they need it, and the health and medication and immunization forms only if they need it. So all of the forms that that parent needs to turn in for the rest of the summer come out right off the printer, right behind that registration confirmation. So we've recombined the registration and the day camp forms process. So let's take a look at some of those other issues we talked about. Time. This is the biggest winner because parents are no longer filling out 4 copies of 4 forms by hand and then turning them into our staff for them to read over manually and vet and then call them to recollect. Much of that work is now done by the system. So one thing they had to check previously was if they indicated a health issue, we needed to make sure that they gave us enough detail about that health issue. Now when they say yes to health issue, the health form comes out right behind it, and they know they need to fill that out and turn it back in. Okay? That information is saved. So if you are that parent who registered for 4 different camps across the summer, you're still required to send your forms in to those 4 different camps. But let's say you forget to do that, and you show up to camp number 2, and they have no idea where your forms are or anything like that. In our old world, we'd call the first center, see if they have it, see if they can interoffice it over. Yeah, we'll put it in our office, but it might not be there for 3 days. Okay, Mrs. Smith, why don't you come over here and fill out these 4 forms again for us?
Right, and what does the parent say in those cases?
I
Oh my
I
gosh,
don't
like,
know.
you don't understand what a relief it is. Because what do they want to do? The bare minimum, right? And I don't blame them, right? I only want to do what I have to do because I've got kids running around, You know, people by the hair, we're trying to grab them, and it's a mess. So this is a real win for our customers and at least our ears, right? We don't have to hear them complaining about that.
One thing I didn't see on there that I know is a huge time runners is, do your forms not have who's allowed to pick up the child?
We do. That's the day camp authorization. That prints out for a day camp. What particularly takes a long time about that?
Well, I mean, and a lot of our forms are Department of Children and Family driven, unfortunately, and that's what I'm.
So I would say to you, we went through this process. There are plenty of forms that you have that you cannot have this process work for, right? What we can do is go through and we picked out exactly what we needed, right? What we could use, threw that in, and then built the logic in to say, okay, you register for a program that does require this form, print out then. Because what I'm hearing from you, I guess, is that you have a ton of different forms. And my guess is that your staff probably don't really, there's only one or two people that know exactly what you need, right? Somebody turns in a packet and somebody goes through, oh, this isn't right, make sure you get something else from them, right? So the benefit of this is, it's dummy-proof for the staff. If you make the logic right, the forms that you need print out. Some of those forms are blank with the exception of the data that you already have in the database.
Right.
Which is why I want to say, with Danny here, that it's really critical that we have access to the database, right? To the databases, because we've been bred to learn Crystal, and these are the great solutions that we can get out of it. If we can't get to the data, we can't get this. Also, if the custom report, if I can make this in Crystal only, but I cannot make it in ActiveNet, then it's not as easy for my staff, because all my staff don't have access to Crystal reports. This comes out natively with the system. So that was my way of worming that.
So, yeah,
I've already said it a million times.
Yeah,
The
Bill.
one thing I would say, for Shannon, we've had to fight about paperwork with every unit, every time we've gone about it. And basically what we end up doing is bring your paperwork. Okay, what do you need to know? I need to know this, it's already in class. I need to know this, it's already in class. I need to know this, it's already in class. I need to know this, okay, that's not in class, we can make that up front. I need to know this. And we had to sit down with every unit, but at the end of this, by showing them, this is already in class, that means you don't have to write it down again. And telling you exactly the same thing. This way, you don't have to write it down again.
I do. Because we have, let's say we have one camp that goes all summer long, and you have 12 weeks.
Yeah.
We still have a form, but that form stays with the counselor, everything highlighted that's important, so it follows them all through the different camps. But when you guys do, we kind of do the same thing, but also we have it set up that we put a deposit down.
We do slightly.
As I was going to ask you, because on that computer, but a lot of times when the parents fill the information out, how many times do parents not know the answer and put the dots on it?
We do see it occasionally. I don't have a
So no, there's a good answer for this. It's not our monkey, okay? It's not our monkey. The programmers are responsible for verifying this information. We know that we don't get the proper doctor information.
Right.
We know that we don't get the proper tetanus information. But the truth of the matter is, when they're writing it down on a piece of paper before we automate this process, we didn't know either.
Right,
We
right.
didn't know. So this is, we say at the front of this operation to our staff that, listen, if you're going to send your kid without the proper health information, you are putting your child at risk.
Right,
It's not
right.
us. We're going to act on what you give us. Please give us your best answer. If you later figure out you don't know the tetanus now, you want to put your best guess in, come back and tell us. Right? We ask that you not guess about the swimmer.
Yeah, so we don't do our, you guys do yours online?
We have FlexReg, so.
We don't let our parents, we don't do it online.
And I'm just wondering the time.
Yeah.
And the birth certificate's checking.
Right.
I'm just wondering the time that it would take
Oh, I agree.
standing
I
at the
like
counter, typing the information in. Registration day is,
Oh, well.
we've got, especially for our skiing and sailing, they fill up in 15 minutes.
Yes.
And you have one, if you get stuck with the cashier that's slow typing,
That person in line can lose a
that
spot.
person behind them is gonna lose their spot. And that's the only downside. I like the thought of it. I just don't know because we have FlexReg right now, we can't be online.
Before you throw the baby out with the bathwater, Ben missed an opportunity. Can you go back to the screen that comes up? I'll show you the beauty of this. Phil, back to the question with Prince or Apple. Right, go back one more.
The problem.
These, after we had that same reaction, right? But the first year you do it, guess what happens? They stick.
That's true.
So when the registration comes up, it's a matter of letting the parents verify that information. So the first year we were scared, right? Because we're like, what's going to happen? And you know, it's like a big battle. It's a big ball of nerves that day. Because everybody wants to get into culinary camp. Or whatever it is that you guys have one, right? Where you just know this one's going to be sold out in 6 minutes, right? So there is a fear. And guess what? The problem with that culinary camp isn't that there's a forms process. The problem with that culinary camp is there's not enough spots or enough resources, and that's okay. We know that there's going to be a battle for that. This is a requirement, right? So I feel like some of our pushback that we get from our recreation staff is about putting our foot down and saying, let's talk about what the real problem is here, right?
Same thing with the front desk user that may not be as savvy. That exists with or without this form process.
You guys have
You're kind of in that.
Busing?
We're already in this boat, right? It's just how do we kind of make the best of it. I'm going to do Bill first.
And which, again, went through the exact same thing. We're nowhere near that automated, but we do allow online registration, and we do have a lot set up with the forms where we basically bring the forms back. Don't fill them out now.
Right.
Bring the forms
Yeah,
back.
we can just register and go, here you go.
Right. Well,
Bring it back.
but
Picks them
well,
up.
it's
Talk about that night section.
well, yeah, we have fun, but the thing is, we had a site or any site for associated site. They had applications every year. They came in a month before into the lottery to see who was even going to be allowed to register. And the year after we did this, the lottery went away. We thought, you can't have lottery anymore. And the manager said, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And they were done with registration in 3 hours total. We no longer have lines around the buildings because of these changes we made. Or showing up at 4 in the morning to get in line. We have we were stunned that this happened, but it actually made, by doing it all on the computer, it made everything else so much faster that instead of our staff being there, at 8 in the morning and staying until 4 or 5 and finishing up, at 1 o'clock they're done. At noon they're done. Sometimes at 10 they're done.
He was saying my site is the co-site, but because I'm so involved in class, I've always done registration with them for the last 10 years. So even when we were doing paper registrations, I was doing it. And it went from, oh my gosh, this is so stressful, to, wow, where are the parents? How's the class doing? We looked it up, oh wow, that week's almost full, great.
But
I haven't seen the parents in a while.
You guys don't have busing either, right?
For our camps.
See, because we have the busing, we have the drop down.
Right, so I'm going to take a page out of Bill's book here because he put it very well. What you want to do is sit down with your programmers first and say what's required, make a whole list, and drill them on what's required. Make sure they have
everything's required. You won't be able to get rid of anything.
Right.
We had to say, what size of t-shirts? Well, we don't give t-shirts everywhere. So you can't have that. I can't have t-shirts just for just the arts department, right? We're going to do this universally. You're not in a box now.
So make a list of
That's
what's
every
required
question you ask is a problem.
and really vet with them what is required. And then after you have that list, take that to class, like Bill was saying, and find out which of those you already have answered in the database. And then whatever ones are required but not in your database yet become what you're prompting customers for. So in Shannon's case, it would be the things like pickup, or in your case, it'll be things like the bus route. Okay? So start with what's required, eliminate what you already have in class, and then you're left with a list of registration prompts that you need to ask clients.
I would ask one more question. I would say find out what's required by every one of your programs. If it's not universal, it goes out. Okay, and that's what you're left with. So if you have bus routes and pickups at some, make that a piece of paper answer. Don't put that in automated because you won't be able to.
See,
because it's not germane for everyone.
See, because we have certain camps, but we have a bus, we use the bus list, the bus driver knows what kids go on the bus. So you can break it down even further and further.
Bare necessities, I would say.
Mhm.
Sorry, Lauren.
Go ahead.
No, it's okay. Our facility actually opened in 2000, and we started out as class, and then switched over to Smartly. And we had to get everyone else to buy into Smartly. We started out, our building was probably twice as big as this one, and then the alarm was wrapped halfway around the building. What we did was we started to train our staff. We have a front desk that would hold 3 registers. We moved into a classroom. We could do 8 to 10 people at a time.
Yep.
Right.
We also let them come in before registration began, and we did a quick 20, 30-minute, this is your information, this is what we're gonna do, this is how we're gonna do it, bring the venue managers in, let them know what's going on. Through the years, we've learned shortcuts like, don't put your camps in order when they occur. Get that culinary camp because it's only 20 spots. Put that first. Things like that. Having people a week before make sure your information is correct. Put a credit on your account so when you do the registration at home, it sucks your money up and you don't get caught in trying to pay for it down the road. So little things like that can help your registration so much quicker. We have gone from opening our doors at 8 in the morning, parents coming in at midnight night before us, midnight outside, getting into our building. We have gone from starting at 9 o'clock in the morning and going until about 4 to being finished in less than an hour. And we do the most in our whole company. That's how quick, that's how being become automated has helped us tremendously.
Well, I'd say the first year, I think the first year is gonna be tough, because that's where you're trying to get the base information in, but once you do that, you're not adding that next new information, it goes a lot faster. When we went online, right now, we only average 20% online registration for summer camp, and that cut 4 hours off our registration. Just that 22% that doesn't come to the door made it monstrous.
Absolutely. So I'm going to finish going through the rest of these goals here, and then I got a couple things to show you. Like I said, we're unexpected benefits out of this. So we talked about the fact that we now have that information populated by the system across all the different forms. So parents is filling out their name and address 6 different times. That's all printed at the top of each of those forms. Information sharing. Information sharing is an interesting one because it is what I would say we have not achieved by this solution alone. We still require parents to turn in those forms. So the forms print out and that's all automated and nice. But then, like you guys are saying, they take those back home and get them filled out, possibly get a doctor's signature on it if they need it or something like that, and they turn them back in as paper forms. So we still have that problem of sharing it between our centers. And that's still a problem that we're trying to tackle and we have some ideas for, but I wouldn't say that we solved that problem with this solution alone. Information not saved, we absolutely fixed that. It's saved not only from camp to camp, but as Len was saying, from year to year too. So even if you're super scared about year 1, just keep your eyes on year 2, because it's going to go a lot better.
Do you complete your courses?
We do. The information, remember, it's on the customer, so that'll stay in the past. Customer education. I checked this off. We are doing a slightly better job of informing the customers of the forms process. Now when you print out a form packet for a customer, there's a little cover sheet that says fill these out and turn them into these centers, to the rest of these camps. So we're kind of moving in the way of customer education, but the big win here is that they need to know a lot less. They don't need to know what to do with an immunization form or if their kid was out of state but is immunized, they need to fill it out. All they need to know is what spits out of that printer, you fill out and you turn in. All of the thinking, all of those hard questions are now answered by the system based on their answers to those prompts.
Have you guys, for those of you guys that have multiple forms to fill out, have you ever tried to put a website up or just put on your webpage what you need to do?
Mhm.
It's freaking impossible, right? And you're just like, if this, then this, but maybe this, and remember, if you live in this district, then it's a little bit different, right? That is a huge win because you don't have to explain it. Parents don't care about all that other stuff. They just want to know what they have to fill out. So when that comes off the printer, we solve that customer education and the staff trying to interpret or misinterpret, right? Because exactly what they need prints off.
And parents and our staff hate the if-then logic, right? Because you have to remember it. What loves if-then logic? Right? Crystal and computers. So all of that if-then stuff no longer needs to be memorized by our staff. We put it in the system and it's doing the thinking for us. Staff not checking the forms, again, they don't have to go through and make sure that they've listed allergies and then environmental allergies and then particular environmental allergies. If they said yes to health issues, fill this out in its entirety. Okay? So there's no more interpretation going on in those forms at the staff level. And like we were saying, we either eliminated or helped out in the staff education, either took those questions completely out of their hands, or gave them the tools that they need to answer those for the customer. So we told them, if you answer yes, the health form will print out. If you answer no, it won't print out. So that way, when a parent says, hold on, I didn't get any health forms, well, they can say, you told us you didn't have any health issues. Do you want me to change that? Do you want me to update that? Then a health form will print out.
So that's why you're gonna.
We've talked enough about the ways of staff effort and chasing it down. I'm sure we're all on the same page and you can see where this will help out. I've got a particular example of how this can really help with your efforts in form collection between those months from February to June that we'll see in a second. We are obviously much more automated than we were before. We're not fully automated. As I said, a lot of the things like the doctor's signature isn't digital or automated at this point yet, but that is room for growth in the future. And perhaps the biggest win is that we were able to get that leverage back with the customer. Okay, now we're able to say, in order to register, you have to do this for us. You have to answer these 8 questions that we need to know, and then we've got the power to tell you to fill out your health form. We've got the power to tell you to fill out the immunization form. We've got the power to say what forms you have turned in already and what forms you're still missing, and can hinge that on the actual registration itself, because we're interrupting that registration process to get those 8 answers back. So it's not all as rosy as I've made it out to seem. We did have some significant hurdles, one of which was eConnect. So those 8 great prompts show up on eConnect exactly as you saw them here, exactly as you saw, well, put it in eConnect CSS rather than program registration, but those same exact questions show up. They have to answer each and every one of them, or provide an answer for each and every one of them before they're able to continue the registration. But for those of you who are familiar with eConnect, after you finish your registration, it just shows you kind of a little snippet of the registration confirmation. You don't get all those nice fancy footers that we had on the report where we hit all those extra forms. So we've got kind of a workaround in place for eConnect right now. After you register on eConnect, you fill out all those answers, and then it takes you to a splash page that explains the different forms. That thing that Len was talking about, this is where we ran into that difficulty actually, was trying to explain to parents all the different forms logic. So we make an attempt at that on our eConnect registration and tell them what forms they need to fill out and return to us. But we are at a much bigger advantage than we were in years past, because now we know whether they need a health form. We know whether they need an immunization form. We know that they have registered and have things to fill out.
Why
You
would,
put your credit card
like, we
card,
don't,
you
for our
use the money
eConnect
or their card.
customers, they don't, they don't get a confirmation other than what's on the screen.
Right.
But the
Yeah,
receipt
yeah,
that
so
we've designated for
That's what I'm
public
saying.
access
You guys don't
has
have
all the
to do
logic
it.
built
So you
into it, and
register.
it mirrors the
They come in in person
confirmation.
and you
Why
gotta
wouldn't
type
you
it
do
in
that?
13 times.
One difficulty was
say this is when it's gonna
linking
run. I can
back
take it from
to
the credit card.
the
So
actual
we did
registration
25
tables that we needed
deposits,
for
and then
the
people
forms.
put the
And
money
the second part of that was
for the
that
rest of
the
the stuff.
actual
Auto
form
pay 2 weeks
itself,
prior.
depending on how well you dealt the term crystallized, right? So you take a PDF, if you just take an image of that PDF, put it into Crystal, your form's gonna be big, and it's gonna be, like 5, 6 meg email that customer is getting. So there's some work to be done on what we call crystallizing, which is rebuilding the reports in
It automatically
Crystal
takes it
to
from
try
the
to pare
card.
down. That was one concern for
But
us.
you can't see the
Side
number
of
yet.
the receipt.
We did run through a hurdle. We tried to do that. We ran through, I can't remember off the top of my head what our hurdle was, but we could not reproduce it to the same degree
Okay.
and get it to do what we wanted to. So we had to take a knockoff solution. But we got the grade 8 questions from all the folks.
Come learn something new from each other. Right?
Another problem we ran into was out-of-date information. So let's say a customer signs their child up on February 26th, and they say at that point that they're a swimmer. They've been doing great at the pool. They've taken their first couple of lessons. Then they take a trip to a pool in early May, and they have a terrible experience, and their child decides that they hate the water, they never want to go near the water ever again as far as they're concerned. And so the parent now wants to mark them as a non-swimmer. In order to do that, they have to call our staff, who have to update that prompt, and all of that has to happen so that when we get to camp time, we don't throw that kid back in the water for the swim test, okay? If we fail at any point in that process, we can have a very angry parent at our doorstep asking why we threw them in the water when we clearly came back and said that they were not a swimmer. So you have to be very careful for out-of-date information. The way we got around this is because those participant profile forms are so easy to print out now and easy for the parent to fill out, all they need is their signature. So what you can do is your first day of camp, right? We require for our day camp that they sign in. So on the first day of camp, you have the stack of participant profiles ready and waiting for your parents as they come in. When they drop off the kid, they look over that form, make sure everything's accurate, put their signature on it, and they're out the door. And that way we know, as of day one of camp, all of the information on that participant profile is accurate. We had a lot of work to do with change management, which we kind of hit on in this discussion already. But we had a lot of work to do both with our staff and our customers to try to convince them that this process would be good for our agency, for them, for us going forward, that we have all these benefits. So it was really, we were really concerned about selling this to our staff, and that's why we came up with things like Grade 8. So if you guys are thinking of adopting this for yourselves, just know that you most likely, depending on the state of your agency right now, will have a significant work to do in change management and getting people to actually trust the system, like we were talking about, convincing them that moving away from inner office is actually the way to go. And then finally, you want to keep an eye out for something that I call mission creep. So the change management comes in the first year. Everybody's really nervous and really on edge and really concerned that this is going to fail. And we're going to have, our biggest driver of business, day camps, are going to bomb for that summer. And that's what everybody's concerned with for the first summer. At the end of that August, I was bombarded with calls from facility programmers who were saying, great, day camp forms went excellent. Now I need it for gymnastics. Now I need it for aquatics. Now I need it for kids' care. Now I need it for child care. Okay? And I had a lot of trouble with kind of bringing them back into the box and saying, listen, day camps is something that is agency-wide, completely standard. We know that we need these 8 questions for every one of these participants. So I wasn't saying that we couldn't use this process for anything else, but if you start implementing this process for each individual program, you're going to have a mountain of work and a lot of catch-up to do. And remember, all of those prompts are stored on that client info. So if you have aquatics asking them 8 questions, and childcare asking them 8 different questions, and gymnastics asking them 8 different questions, now that client has 24 different answers that you've got to keep track of and make sure you update. So you want to be careful for what I dubbed mission creep, or the spread of this process to maybe some programs that aren't especially cut out for it. You want to make sure that they are standardized across the board, that you have that required info, like Len was saying, for only the required info for every one of your programs. To make sure you watch out for stuff like that mission.
And the kid are already on a different
And so finally, I'm going to talk about some of the benefits that we've already seen and some of the ones that we hope to introduce as part of this process. So this is to answer Shannon's question about what to do in those months in between. Okay? Now that we have all of those grade 8 questions filled out, we can build a matrix like this that says what forms the staff should be expecting for each one of their participants. So when we follow this along, Lolo Jones did attend a school in Maryland and is not registered for a playground, so they don't need either of those forms. They just need the profile, the authorization, and the help form, because they indicated that they had health issues. Okay? Lindsey Vaughn does not have any health issues, so we don't even need a health and medication form. So this is the leverage that we're talking about by putting the power back into the hands of your staff. Okay? Now they're not just staring at a class list and wondering to themselves what forms are needed, what forms have been turned in, staring and comparing against a list or flipping through a binder to find out what's been turned in already. You have it all in a matrix right here, what forms you should expect for each client and how many you should have in total for your camp. Here's something unexpected that we had. So I talked about those swimmers. So what our programs do is for every swim trip that we take, the kids get retested at the beginning of the trip. Or as soon as they get to the pool, they get retested to see if they're allowed to go in the deep end or have to stay in the shallow end. They get a particular colored wristband based on whether they pass or fail. What we had, so if you have a camp of 80 kids, those kids are sitting along the pool, and nobody's allowed to go in the pool until everybody's been tested, right? Can't have that danger. So everybody stays out of the pool until you test them one by one. They each get slapped with the green wristband and the red wristband, depending on if they have to stay in the showers. Now, if you've got 80 kids, probably the first 2 hours of their trip was just sitting on the wall of the pool waiting for the other kids to get tested. A lot of our participants told us ahead of time that they don't want to be tested. They're not swimmers. We already knew that they were not going to pass that test and only wanted to be in the shallow end. So now what we're able to do is produce a class list based on that answer and split out all of the non-swimmers. So all of these non-swimmers, we don't even bother testing anymore. We just slap them with the red one, put them in the shallow end, and now we're only testing those ones that want to try to get into the deep end.
Nice.
Here is another class list that we built, and this is a class list with a photo, right? This is a photo like would you store on their client table and would print out like on a membership card or something like that. But we built a class list that would have that photo so that when our program directors are going on a trip, they can print out this info. And you can also add on to here things like the emergency contact name or the physician's name if you want to add on to it. And taking this one step further, we kind of piloted a project where we had wristbands. And we put a QR code on the wristband for all of our kids so that when they went to the amusement park, if they lost a kid or something like that, because you've got 400 kids and the staff member might not know each one individually, so each of our kids had a wristband with a QR code on it, and they could just scan that QR code and it would show up with the kid's name, what camp they were registered for, their parents' phone number. All of that information was stored right on that QR code right there because we had it in the database.
That sounds really great, but I couldn't get the staff to really buy in on that.
Oh, I think that's fantastic.
I mean, it was great. I think it's a great idea. We have, I don't know how you guys do your trips, but we'll have,
Like Chuck E. Cheese. Where's my kid?
let's say out of the 40 community centers, we break that into 3, so 20, what are we talking about? 15 community centers may go to a theme park all in one day, right? And there's individual staff that supervise 1 to 10, so there may be 3 people from each site that go to the sites. However, we send career staff, you guys know, you send everybody, you try to do it all in one day, and you send everybody down to Kings Dominion, and, inevitably, somebody gets separated, inevitably, somebody shoplifts something. These are made-up stories, inevitably, somebody gets lost, and the sweeper, right, there's like that full-time staff is making sure that before the buses pull out, you've got everybody, goes around and finds it, is talking to, checking in with, the people over at, security and all that stuff. And this is from experience, right? you find a kid, and the only identifier is that shirt that you give them.
Right.
They don't know, they can't tell you what camp they go to, right? You have no idea. So my idea was, or our idea was, we'd have this on them, and they could just take their phone out, scan it, figure out who it was, and call the staff and say, all right, I got, so-and-so. But I can tell you that it was pretty popular, but it did take a little time to print the QR codes. There was some overhead that was associated with it.
What kind of wristband are we talking about?
Paper?
It was like a paper wristband. It was the swim wristband. You could print on it. We had Excel.
Maybe that doesn't want to work.
We exported it, threw it into Excel, and all it had on there was that QR code. And then Debbie Hoffman, who was here yesterday, she was at that time working. She's like, well, what if somebody grabs the kid's wrist who doesn't know and scans the kid's thing? And I didn't have an answer for that.
You don't
Yeah, but I mean,
It's not like they're working the arm.
I know, but
Okay.
in any event, so those are some of the challenges we have, that we never really got that big flight. But this is, I don't know about your staff, but we used to, and some sites do still, take a giant folder, I mean a giant 3-ring binder, and you can see the staff person, like they're walking like this, they got their backpack. So now we can do a lot more specific information. The pictures on there, the
But you already
descriptions
have this
on
one
there,
code.
and anyone can print it, right? So it's not like you have to do anything special. if the sweepers or the full-time staff are going, they can print this out without talking to
So you
anybody.
do
And they'll-
it, you hit
everybody's gonna be
search.
there. And have a picture of everybody who's gonna be there, right? So there's some really good benefits there.
And the key to all of this cool different reports is getting that information into the system in the first place. So if we didn't have an answer to the swimmer non-swimmer question in the database, we wouldn't be able to generate that list. If they were still writing it on a piece of paper, we wouldn't be able to generate this list.
So you go.
Same thing with the emergency contact info. We wouldn't be able to put it on there and in a way that's helpful to our staff unless we're collecting it to begin with as part of that registration process.
What version of class are you guys on for these reports?
7.
I got you. So you don't, then is it make a different barcode? The class
Why
one,
did
the
you
barcodes
already
match.
have it?
Well, it makes it move
That's my
like
next
that,
question.
But in the
and
mind,
then but it knows they're the same person. So see, I didn't take Trevor's picture just now.
And so, last but not least, of course,
So anytime
this
you
is
do it,
not
you
a
can say,
complete
if you see the
solution
names
at
the
this
same,
point. So,
instead of me
going
going to
forward,
account, I can go to
one thing that we can do to improve it is to eliminate that inner office I was talking about sharing the forms. So once we have these answers, the next step is to put all that data in a centralized place that your staff can get to at the push of a button, right? And we have that a little bit now, where they can reprint the form at the push of a button. They can print out that grid and tell them what forms they need at the push of a button. Okay, but the actual forms themselves are still paper and kind of flying around the commission in those inner office envelopes. So something like a data warehouse or a central storage place would really take this to the next step for us. And another thing, we talked a little bit yesterday about digital signatures and digital forms. If we could fully digitize our forms and maybe by way of those verified digital signatures, kind of loop in a doctor also to maybe get an email and sign it or something like that, right? There'd be a lot of legwork to do for something like that. But if you could get that accomplished, then you're looking at a completely digital solution where from front to back, registration until the end of camp, you have all of your forms collected and stored digitally and only printed when you need it. So that's where we're looking to take this direction, or that's the direction we're looking to take this project. Obviously, it's not quite there yet, but as long as I'm here, we'll still be working on it. So, and that's all I have for you guys today. I'm absolutely available for any questions, or like I said, for more detailed questions, feel free to come find me after, and I'll definitely talk.